Hello, and welcome to 5D with Destiny. What if the secret to life were the desire to experience as much as possible along a series of paths leading to various lessons that you wanted to learn along the way, that you picked before you came here? Most of us were raised to believe that we were created by one or more omnipotent deities who commanded our loyalty and expected for us to follow a certain set of guidelines, that breaking those rules would result in some kind of terrible punishment. First, I would just like to stop for a second and say I realize that we're in our introduction here, but I would like to call bullshit. I feel like that is the equivalent to asking your pets to worship and praise you whenever you get home from work every day, and that if they don't, then you would banish them to a fiery damnation of their soul. That sounds so crazy absurd to me, out of what we would consider to be an omnipotent, all-knowing being. So I just had to say that. I never really bought into that bullshit, even when I was a kid. You can just ask any of my family members. They'll all tell you that I'm weird and that I like to start fights. I do not like to play nice with others, things like that. Obviously, I would disagree. From my perspective, I hate it when people lie. And I think that people are needlessly mean to each other. I am particularly triggered over bullies and now online trolls. It's become like a whole thing. I noticed recently, I have some posts that I've done, and people will come on there, and oftentimes within a group it'll be the same people, and it's like they don't post anything. I remember one guy's, I clicked on his page one time and he hadn't posted anything in the group, but I've seen him 3 different times come on to different posts and troll people. Like, why is that a thing? I know why. I was told throughout my childhood, though, that I spoke out of turn, that I should be a lawyer, salesman, whatever. But a college fund was just not in the stars for me. I wanted nothing more than to be accepted by my family growing up. I had a really hard time. Obviously, the things that I've been talking about. But, having eyes going in the opposite directions also made me an easy target for, cousins. And I wasn't exactly the golden child or seeding our future kind of material. I was never like the one everyone else was depending on. I always loved helping people, probably to get positive attention. I thought a lot about becoming a nurse to follow in the footsteps of my grandmother, who died of suicide when I was only 21, right after having my daughter, her first great-granddaughter. I'm always sad, of course, that my daughter won't get to know her, but, here we are. I grew up, though, with a growth hormone deficiency that I was born with, meaning that I was very small. I remember, I think it was like maybe it was the 5th grade, I was only 40 pounds. And CPS was involved at times. They thought that there was neglect, which there was not. I was taken care of. I just didn't eat. I didn't feel like it, and I was really tiny. And so I was underweight from that. And I remember being prodded by doctors a lot. I had a lot of issues with my eyes and ears, but I'm completely blind in my right eye, and I'm mostly blind in my left eye. I do have what I would call tunnel vision. I don't have any depth perception, obviously. Contrast isn't really a thing, so I don't really see the world in high def, I would say. But they call it an optic nerve hypoplasia, where because of the growth hormone deficiency, my being born a couple of weeks early, and probably some other things, the optic nerves connected between my eyes and my brain were not fully developed. So basically, what's sad is my eyeballs actually work, they can't get the message to my brain. Back to my grandmother, she died of suicide when I was 21. And like I said, right after having my daughter, which was her first great-grandchild. And that's why they're not going to, ever get to know each other. At a certain point, right after it happened, the loving, pragmatic caretaker I had always known, I knew in an instant had demons that nobody could spare or distract her from forever. And I felt like that's what my family had always been trying to do, is they were always like trying to make her feel better and include her, but you could always see this like look on her face. And while everybody else was like pointing fingers at each other, I knew from the moment it happened that it was completely her decision and that she went out on her terms. She always appreciated and encouraged my honesty and my candor. When everybody else would say, we don't talk about those things, she was like the only one that was like, no, if it's the truth, then say that. Don't say things that aren't the truth. I remember there was this one time where I had been gaining some weight recently, and I lost a few pounds, and I was super excited about it. But apparently my grandma hadn't seen me. Last time she saw me, I was smaller than I was after I'd lost my few pounds. So I was like, Grandma, can you tell I lost some weight? And she's like, no, honey, actually it looks like you gained some weight, but you look good. That was my grandma, and I loved that about her. And I always appreciated, even though in that moment, I think I was like 11 or 12. Even though I didn't want to hear that, I knew I needed to. And I always wish that I had somebody in my life that had been that honest with me. And so ever since then, I've always treasured the time that I did have with her. And I wish that, my daughter could have gotten to know her better, but here we are. I'm having to go from a script today, so please bear with me. But, I'm different, and that's kind of the point to my long, drawn-out introduction here, is that, I've seen a lot of things in my life, and I have a very different perspective of the world. Although I wish I had some cool story about how she came to me when it happened, or that there was some cool dream, there wasn't. Although she was how I would later test mediums, and I would use her for paranormal investigations, since nobody expects your grandma to have killed herself. So I always got super generic answers from mediums that I didn't trust or didn't believe, or that's how I would be able to tell, because they would say something super generic like, oh, her body just gave out, or she wants you to know that she's at peace now, and she's not in pain anymore. She wasn't really in pain for very long, but I'm sure it was pretty bad when she was. But I know that that's not her. So I'll ask extra questions just to confirm. But I know. You can kind of get a pretty good idea pretty quickly. Fortunately, the main medium that I worked with did tell me about her and her, I guess I say fortunately, but when I struck gold, the girl that I struck gold with went on to tell me more about her inner turmoil, and even that she kept a black book that she journaled in, and she told me where she had hidden it in a specific area of a house that we'd lived in. It was fascinating. And I actually asked my mom about it, or told her about it, because I thought it was crazy awesome, all these other parts. When I got to that part, she just gasped. She had the journal. I didn't even know that the book existed, and she had it in her possession. So that was, stick a fork in her. She was done. I ended up dedicating my first book to my grandmother, called A World of Parapsychology and the Paranormal, a guide to some of the greatest mysteries in the world. I know it's a mouthful, but it's mine, and I was and still am super proud of it. I dedicated that to her, and I dedicate this first episode to her as well. I've always loved writing, and that was just a compilation of notes and experiences, basically organized in alphabetical order from over a decade of trying to understand my experiences with the paranormal. I should have stayed focused on that passion all along, but we're meant to do the journeys we're meant to do. And now I understand at least part of why. But I was honestly confused and scared by some of my experiences and some of how I was raised, because even if I knew some of that shit was bullshit, People really scare you as a kid into believing in those stories. And so now I understand as a grown-up why so many people have such a hard time, changing their belief systems. And I really believe that to a certain degree that most of us are traumatized, due in part from that experience, as well as many other things, but I'll get to that. But it took a long time for me to overcome the belief that I was in danger by exploring metaphysics and parapsychology to the degree that I really wanted and needed to fulfill my interests. It all started when I was 12 years old. I'll just jump right in here. While laying in bed one night listening to, don't laugh at, wait, go ahead and laugh, I don't give a shit, Vanilla Ice while in my room trying to fall asleep. Yeah, it was 1990. I felt someone like watching me. Have you ever had that feeling like there's someone standing behind you? Well, I was laying on my stomach looking down. I remember I had my head like on my forearm and I had my eyes closed. And I felt someone standing behind me. And now my room is almost pitch black because we had those contemporary black horizontal blinds. And it pretty well blacked out my room. I had like a little sliver of light up against the opposite wall from my bed. And I sat up to see. I was not expecting this, but what I would now known to be a full body apparition. I saw everything but like the bottom of her legs and feet, and she was just kind of standing up over my bed. She looked very aware but confused by my presence, and she just kind of hovered over and stared down. I couldn't really tell you like any of the details of her face, but I do remember like looking at her eyes. Like I hear a lot of stories about people that say, oh, they didn't have eyes or the eyes were black. But I remember she had to have at least somewhat detailed eyes because she looked confused. And she just looked down at me like, why are you here? Who the fuck are you? But I was just as surprised as she was. I was thinking the same thing, I'm sure. Well, maybe not the same thing, but I was terrified. She didn't look terrified. She just looked confused. Now, my family wasn't actually super religious. We came from super conservative people. So, like, my grandparents had a lot of religious ties, particularly on my dad's side. But otherwise, we really didn't have a super lot of religion. Like, I was on 2 different church choirs for different periods. And I went semi-regularly, I would say, but I didn't know how to pray, is what I'm getting at. So in that moment, I'm like, how do I talk to God? What do I say? So I did what I knew, and I recited that whole, now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep prayer. And I just said that like probably 4 times before I looked up, and she was gone. I think I talked about that in my book too. I don't think, I was afraid because of my parents like burned anything religious specifically into me. But there was this sense of evil versus not evil. And to me, anything outside of the norm was evil. Anything that was not physical incarnation, I could touch you, and that was evil. Everything was evil. Now it sounds absurd to me even just thinking about it. But I think, mainly for that moment in time, a lot of it was like 80s movies, like Freddy and Jason and all of those, Michael Myers. That was like more of what actually scared me too than even the good and evil stuff. I was scared by what happened, but I didn't specifically think that it was evil. Like I had, I think, some of those roots deep inside me where I would get all, clenched up because I was scared of what the possibilities were and if it could be evil. I think I remember like calming down fairly quickly, but I'll tell you what, I did not sleep with the room completely blackened out like that for a long, long time, like until I was 40. I know. I went through a spiritual journey. It was a whole thing. Now, my parents, when I went to tell them the next day, though, did not give me the impression that they believed me. I think they thought I saw something that my brain like imagined, and then I just conjured it up into something more. But I had been here for a couple of months by that time, so I was pretty darn familiar with what my room looked like at night, and it did not look like that. There was somebody blocking the light, and she was standing there looking at me. That's a stark difference between that and blackness, you know, with just a slit of light coming in from the post outside. Like, it was kind of one of those things where I don't need affirmation, and I didn't need it then. But knowing that they wouldn't believe me really, I think, took a lot away from the respect that I had for my parents in that moment, because I knew that there was nothing I could say or do to convince them, even though I was telling the truth. And that always like bothered me, I guess. But my friends, on the other hand, were super supportive. And it was funny because, well, some students had overheard or teased me over it a little bit. But, you know, growing up with those eyes going in the opposite direction, like, fuck it. What was funny was you would either have a mix of kids that would be like really scared or would kind of be dicks about it. But then you'd also have the other mix of kids that were super into it. Like some people that just wanted to hear it and they would eat that shit up. And then a few were like, I have a friend or an aunt who is psychic. You know what we should do? And it was great. I loved talking about it with my friends, and I kind of felt like for the first time in my life, this kind of sense of belonging. I had just moved into this town, and before that I had lived in the next major city over, and I always had paraeducators because of my vision issues. So I was seen as the handicapped kid. Well, when I came out here, I didn't have that anymore. We didn't want any of that. I already knew how to read and write and stuff. I just wanted to be a normal kid. And I had a really hard time talking to people. And I was really scared first to tell my best friend, because I had just become best friends with her a couple of months ago. And I remember feeling super nervous that day. And she thought it was badass. And she helped me kind of break through a certain anxiety shadow that I guess I'd always been stuck in since I'd gotten there, because I was so nervous to talk to people, and she just did it for me. And then people would ask me questions. Now, don't get me wrong, from that point forward, I was the weird kid, but I didn't mind. I was already the weird kid. I'd rather have that kind of weird than the other kind of weird, like disabled kind of weird. And, you know, now I understand as an adult that neither should have really bothered me, but you're a kid. I know what it's like to be a kid. And there's nothing you could have told me at the time that wouldn't have made me wanted to feel normal, at least to some degree. And at least I felt normal enough because I had people to talk to. So that made me really happy. And I did actually make some friends, you know, a couple over that, or at least got closer with them anyway, because they were kind of already my friends or my friends of friends. But you know, I had something cool going on. So we would go back to my house and we did all the shit you're not supposed to do. But I'll get to that. I had already started to kind of gravitate towards the weird ones anyway. So my best friend, for example, she was considered the weird kid before I got there. So it just fit. And I never planned on having anything like this happen. I never even conceived of anything like that happen. Like, the only ghost movies I remember seeing before that were like Poltergeist. I saw The Exorcist, but I would consider that not really a ghost movie. It was terrifying though, but I didn't get that kind of vibe here. That experience was like the first of many, which I think I'll spend probably either one entire episode going more into depth with some of my experiences, or I'll just sprinkle them in throughout. Haven't quite decided yet. But that was what led me down that road. Curiosity and understanding and confronting it on my own terms. Which is anywhere but where it led me for many years. After my friends, you know, like I said, taught me about the Ouija, whatever, and seances, I learned about other forms of divination, like tarot. Now, during one of my first readings at only 17, I just decided, I'm going to start doing these. Now, I didn't have a tarot card, and I I had played some cards with like my family, so I knew about the cards, and I just decided I'm going to take this deck, and hearts means one thing, spades means one thing, and so on and so forth. And then I decided I was going to do tarot based on that information. I did it actually a few times before. I wrote the first time, but it wasn't the first time. It was after a few readings, because I was pretty well into it. I don't want to say I did a bunch, but I did at least 3 or 4. I did at least a handful of them. When I encountered something that I perceived to be negative, which was actually like what made me stop being interested in the paranormal, because it was so bad that it was over a decade before I went back to it. And I don't even, to this day, know what I encountered. Maybe I'll uncover it in hypnotherapy or something, but I have no idea what that was. I just know that as I was doing a reading, I got this feeling about someone which was normal when I was doing it, and I feel that now when I do it, but whatever it was, I crossed paths with something negative, and I instantly went to evil. And that was that religious programming again. And I think that I, didn't know what else to do with it, because it was like an intense energy is the best way I can describe it. But I don't really, looking back now, think that it was actually evil. I don't think I knew how else to process it, because it was just a very intense energy. That's the best way I can describe it. It was like in the pit of my stomach, and it just rushed over me, and it kind of just went out in all directions, but it hit hard and fast first, right in the pit of my stomach, and then it stuck with me for a long time, and I tried to avoid anything paranormal. It just stopped me in my tracks, after that just terrible feeling like I tapped into something evil. I was so scared. I swore off everything supernatural and paranormal for as long as I could. About 10 years later, maybe 15, this show that I'm sure everyone has heard about came out called Ghost Hunters. Now, I knew that there was a strong likelihood that some of that fear factor stuff could be dramatized or even at times scripted, for all I knew. But after I watched it for the first time, I didn't get that vibe, so I had to keep reminding myself of that, because that's not to say that they couldn't be actors, you know what I mean? Especially early on. But like I said, it did feel very genuine, and I liked the premise of trying to disprove things, going in with kind of more of a skeptical mind, and trying to make sense of what was captured in a very logical and not overly dramatic kind of way. And like I said, just feel very genuine. They felt like they had genuine concern, fear, or surprise. And that's what I think intrigued me the most. I felt like that series and those people normalized what had previously been considered to be taboo. And they made it mainstream. And in doing so, they opened up this sort of door for others to join in on the hunt, so to speak. Now, my ex-husband, with whom I was still with at the time, he had been joking for years that I was haunted. Because while I was trying to avoid it didn't ever, leave me alone. It kind of always just followed me after that point. And I'm not just talking about little creaks or things sliding around. I'm talking about people showing up, not just for me, but for other people in my home. Or electricity in every single place I would live in. Shorting out, going crazy. One time, the worst I had was I had a really bad day. I think I was working at Walmart briefly at that point in time. I don't remember exactly where I was working, but I'd come home from work. I was super grumpy, and I was standing in the kitchen, complaining to my husband, who was in the living room, not really super interested in what I had to say. I think he was playing video games or something, which pissed me off even more. And I'm getting stuff ready for dinner, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I hear this pop. And I hear all of this glass shatter right after. Just all over. I could hear it hitting the ground in a million pieces. And I'm like, what? And I went out around this like bar thing that we had to walk into the dining room where the sound had come from, and I could see that like a light had flashed. There was like a surge of electricity. And I went out, and we had like a ceiling fan above our kitchen table in our dining room. We lived in this like townhouse, and one of the lights, it didn't just burn out like I've had happen a jillion times. It happened. I don't have lights last years. They never last years. They last weeks or months. But I've never had a light do this. It exploded and it hit the ground in a million pieces. It looked like the socket exploded or something. But it didn't. Just the light bulb. It was just the light bulb. It was the weirdest damn thing. And I remember we had the manager come and look at it, and they're like, well, it looks a little singed around here, but they just screwed in another freaking light bulb, and the light bulb came on. So there was nothing wrong with the unit itself. I have no explanation for that, but shit like that would happen to me all the time. The internet, was also just becoming a staple in most homes, at least in the United States. So after we got online, I started Googling my ass off. I'm going to be honest. I'm sure there were a lot of people like me that spent a lot of sleepless nights getting to know Google. And that was kind of at the same time and maybe I was feeding it. The more I would learn, the more would happen. But that was happening simultaneously. Activity did start picking up for me. I started noticing it more and more, lights flickering every day in the house. I lived in as far back as I can remember to seeing people like unexpectedly standing around me. That I mentioned too. I was seeing more of that, which really freaked me out. Up until then, I only had that happen a few times, but it happened a few more in a much shorter period of time during that period. I'd also have my toddler's toys going off. If I was within earshot, I could be just sitting on the couch and it would be just me at home and nobody was walking around, and her toy would go off. So that was happening. My intention when I wrote my book back in 2005 was to kind of get to join the ranks of the people who did that kind of research for a living. By that time, I had collected a decent amount of information, and I had gone on a couple of paranormal investigations, but they were all like friends and a friend of a friend. So it's not like I was going to strangers' houses like they were on the show. I just wanted to try it out, and I wanted to get to use the equipment that they had described, which I did get to. I was kind of going for a psychology degree at the time, and I still have gone for it. I wanted an additional education in like physics or metaphysics or something, because I figured that would be the best way, and still do, to understand those nuances of what could be influencing our experiences, and to help counsel people struggling in order to give them some kind of peace of mind. And so I'm still working on that. So I was also, starting to get involved with that at that time. Unfortunately, the book was not a big success. It was just like a very basic manual of what means what, because I had collected all this information while I was studying it, but I was still pretty green at the time. But I don't know, I've just always been this type of person that loves to share with people what I learned kind of as I'm going along. So that's what I did. But I was also working in the medical field, like I mentioned. I was often doing customer service kind of jobs, and I just really wanted out and really wanted to do something different, and I thought medical would be great. One of the biggest challenges I had, though, was that I didn't exactly have the grades to make the top 10% of the schools in our area, because that's what it would require in order for you to get into the nursing programs. So I really did want to be a nurse, but and I wish that I would have taken it more seriously when I was in school anyway, because I didn't think I could do it. So I honestly didn't apply myself as well as I could have. But I don't know. Maybe I don't, because I found out later on. I went back to at least become an LPN, and I started a tech school. And I realized I was not meant for nursing. I worked in one of the nursing homes alongside CNAs, and I was like giving shots and doing the diabetes checks and the medication rounds. And I give nurses all the props in the world, but I take back what I said. I'm glad that it didn't work out that way, because I am not cut out to be a nurse. So I did get a job and probably would have stayed there forever doing medical administrative work as a medical billing rep, because I had become a medical assistant. But the job that I got, it was sad too, because I was only there for a couple of years. They would lay off and outsource their entire billing department. It was sad. After that, I went back into sales, call center jobs, and I decided to try out car sales in 2016. Now, at that point, I would tell you, or I would have told you, like in an interview, that my job was to have great conversations with people all day. I always saw sales as something like, if you're a really good salesman, you don't have to sell shit. You just have to be really knowledgeable about the thing that you're selling, and then you can just have great conversations. And I still believe that. And it's funny because the first day that I started at the company, now mind you, I hated driving, so I kind of hesitated in the first place because of the whole, one eye thing. I love driving. It just always felt like I was playing with fire. But, I had a clean driving record, and so whatever. But it's funny because I remember being shown around by my new manager on my first day and was introduced to this lady who was our GM assistant. She would eventually become my boss and a great friend while I was there. But I thought to myself how important she seemed to everyone and how much I would love a position like that where, I didn't have to sell anything in order to be important. But I was a pivotal person in what was going on in the daily functions there. I remember thinking maybe I could do call center-y kind of stuff, Just like with my paranormal research, I took great notes and was competing for top place at our dealership location against even senior salesmen within the first few months I was there. And some of those guys had been doing it for years. So turns out that woman that I met on my first day was actually getting ready to launch a department of people who would be supporting those sales staff. Little did I know, I had just reached out to the GM after, they called him BDC, Business Development Coordinator, after the one we had at our store had left to go take another job or whatever. And I said, here's all the things that she was doing wrong, and here's what I think we could do in addition to what she was doing, and I think I could do it better. And he was like, really? And I remember the look that he gave me because he did really well in sales. But here we are. I ended up making the lateral move, is actually down move, because I was making way more money in sales than I did as a BDC working for that lady. But the call center was just being built, and it seemed like a really great opportunity. He had a few different locations that he was overseeing, and this call center was supposed to support all of them. It was a little further of a drive, so I wasn't a huge fan of that. But it was never about the money for me. I love talking to people, and I saw a better way of doing things, so I just felt like it would be a better fit for me. And despite the fact that the drive was further away from home, I just had this feeling that it was not going to be permanent and it was worth doing, which is exactly how it would play out. Now, fast forward another year and a half, and I was the manager of that department, which we relaunched at the location I had started at, which was closer to home. It was fabulous. Now, despite that being just prior to COVID, of course, all three of the stores that my team supported would see record numbers year over year for the next couple of years, which was phenomenal, especially for the used car market. If you know anything about cars, you know that between early 2020 and 2022, the used car market did not do good, especially special finance. And that's what I did. That's what I supported. 2 of the stores were special finance used, and one of them was new. And we saw record numbers at all 3. It was phenomenal. We would eventually use all of those notes that I had taken during my time in sales and created processes and training materials. So needless to say, I was making great money and used some of my free time to investigate paranormal activity. Now, I had gotten back into it because those ones that I had done, they went pretty well, but it was mainly because of people that seemed to need my help. So I would always make an agreement with them where I would agree to doing it, but they had to agree to let me document it because I wanted to use it as an opportunity to get more evidence. And at that point, I wasn't really having many experiences aside from the anomalous electricity kind of stuff. That never really stopped. And we had just moved back into the house that I'm in now, which was the childhood home that I lived in when I saw that at 12 years old. And I did have some stuff prior to this period happen here, but everything was fairly settled as far as face-to-face kind of interactions. I would just have the anomalous stuff happen. I had just remarried, and moved back into that home. My family had continued experiencing activity, though, while I wasn't living here. So I wanted to mention that. But it had gone mostly quiet until just prior to my moving back in. I was going to pay more for rent than I had wanted to, but the schools in the area were great, so I wasn't super worried about it. If anything, I was intrigued, but it did not go as planned. So my family, who were not used to that kind of thing, definitely not my husband. It's kind of one of those things where when you talk to people about having experience, everyone's like, oh my God, I had this one thing, or one time I saw a ghost. He had a couple of cool stories like that. But that was pretty much it. And his kids, my stepkids, never saw anything like that. So that was interesting. And we tried really hard, even though, my sister's kids were telling of stuff that was going on. She would tell me, but I wasn't allowed to talk to them about it because she didn't want to make it worse. She didn't want to scare them. She tried really hard to not feed into it. And so I kind of approached it at first in a similar way with my children, where I tried not to feed into it. And if they did bring up weird things that were going on, I would try to not dispel it, because I would acknowledge that it happened. I didn't want to do what my sister was doing, but at the same time, I didn't feed it either. I would just empower them and be like, tell it to go away. It has to listen to you. And so that's how my children have always been. But I had stuff going on starting a few months after I had moved in for a little while. And I'll tell you what happened. I woke up one morning, I got up to pee, I came back to bed, I was laying there trying to wake up, and I remember my left arm was hanging off the bed. It went out of nowhere. It felt like I had gotten shocked on my hand by someone that was touching my fingertips, except that it didn't hurt. In a split second, I saw this little girl die in a car accident, and instantly I felt this rush of despair and confusion in that moment. And it felt like she wasn't able to move on, she was trapped there, and I didn't know how to help her. Now mind you, this was before the activity had stopped that I just mentioned. I know I referenced that a moment ago, but I'll get to that. The little girl had shown me her death for some reason. I still don't know why they do that. That's ultimately why, but I don't see shit. But she had, at that time, no intention of leaving. In fact, she was wondering where the children were that had lived there before. My nieces and nephew, same ones who'd been reporting activity to my sister. Like I said, I had not gotten to speak with them directly at that point. So it was just me, my husband, and my daughter living full-time at the house, and his kids were coming to visit on the weekends. So there was this one room left open where the little girl, I guess, had been staying or occupying more than the other areas, and she had wondered why the room was open or why it was empty. And, I had suspicions going in that the uptick of activity had something to do with me, and in a way, I do believe it indirectly, but since me and my friends were so intrigued and did those seances, the Ouija boards, all those things you're not supposed to do in a haunted house, I do feel like there was some indirect connection there, but I don't think that was all. I think there was a totally new generation of spirits or stuff going on here. But the feeling I was left with after that experience was that the little girl, like I said, felt like she was trapped, or she didn't want to go until like her mom came for her. The biggest thing that stands out in my mind was she kept apologizing. Like she kept apologizing like she felt like she had done something wrong or she was bad. And I think it was a lot because, obviously she had some issues, but we were like bitching a lot because all of this weird stuff was going on. Like crock pots were getting turned off, not just once or twice or 3 times, but it was happening a lot. The bedroom light would turn on and nobody was going in there. So like all of this stuff was flickering on and off. I already had the electrical things happening, but I was used to that. My new husband, was not used to that, so he was kind of attributing it to the house too. But in any case, she apologized and said that she had caused a lot of that. She just wanted to play and she wanted attention. The outcome of that story is actually pretty interesting, but I'll save that for a later episode. But she was a first in a series of encounters that I would go on to have over the next few months. And the last physical one that I would have, at least in that kind of way, which is actually pretty annoying to me since, I wasn't ready then, but I am now. But right after that is when I had asked for it to stop, and it was because I started seeing these strange dreams. That was kind of like what kicked it off, you might say. But I was seeing these strange dreams where I was all these different people. I was watching myself die or being killed, or I was trying to find people or asking for help. And I just didn't know what to make of these things, and I started going to this like local spirit shop. I told them about what was going on. I learned how to do cleansings, how to close portals, for example, that we think that me and my friends might have opened. And the sightings that my family were seeing did slow down, but the dreams kept coming until I had this one particularly scary one where I was this woman and I was looking down at my body as I was being murdered, and it felt like it took forever. It was strange because there was this really odd sense of peace in that moment, and the fact that it was happening, like you would think you'd be freaking out watching someone dismember your body, but I remember this just really calm feeling, and mainly just being thankful that they left my head on my torso. And it wasn't until I woke up and reflected on that I freaked the fuck out about what I had just seen. So like, first of all, why would I care that my head was still on my torso at that point? I watched them like chop off my arms and legs, and I was okay. I was happy that my head was still on. Like, I woke up and kind of freaked out a little bit. Now, at that point, I verbally asked my guides, because I'd been, advised by the spirit shop, I knew about empowering yourself and setting like terms with spirits, and that was going pretty well for me. But I asked my guides, or whoever was hearing me, to please never let me see anything like that again. And in addition, I had started searching for other people who had the same kind of experiences as me, which I could not find anywhere. So I formed my own online face group, and that's where the paranormal group really like sprouted from. It started basically as just a handful of people that were interested in the paranormal. because I wanted to get into it, but I didn't want to see that kind of stuff. And I figured there had to be other people. Like, if this is how this went, right? Like, maybe you're carrying some of it with you. Maybe people are passing through this house and I'm getting a little bit of whatever they got going on. It's not how that goes, apparently. I'm like one of the only ones. But it was at least nice to talk to other people about it. And I'm sorry if I just got really loud there. Full disclosure, that happens a lot. I get very excited, very passionate about something. So if you hear me starting to ramp up, you might want to turn the volume down. But I did get to log some more paranormal investigations that we did together. And it was great. They turned out to be, super flaky after a little while. But the ones that we did together were really great. Eventually, I did stop using that page. And I'm actually trying to figure out what to do with it. But, after asking for help to not see that stuff again, I didn't see it. Even in investigations. Like, I've never seen another physical, entity since that time. All the way from 12 years old to that time, which I want to say was right around 40, pretty close, probably 38, because it would have been right before I started at that job, so 37, 38. I saw up until that time. I haven't seen any of them since. So between 12 and 37, 38. So that, even though I tried avoiding them, I still saw them. And so when I asked to stop, suddenly I didn't. Now, I did, though, still have weird shit happen. That's never stopped. And I did still have lucid dreams, but I never had another lucid dream like that, where I would see something so horrific that it would just fuck with me. I haven't had that happen. That was pretty intense. A short time after I had formed the group, I was preparing to help this guy with a pretty ugly attachment. I did have a dream of this little girl that was sitting by this beautiful river that seemed oddly familiar to me. It kind of seemed like my happy place, because my happy place it's a beautiful garden along a river, and it's kind of got this Bavarian style house with this water wheel on the outside. I've seen it a bunch of times, and I was out there. Only this time there was this log on the side of the river, and there was this little girl that was sitting in front of the log, and she was playing with it on the shoreline. And this dream felt different than the others. And usually, when I would go into these dreams, I don't just go into a dream and sit there and look at the water. So if I'm in that place, especially once I hit this point, I was kind of like, hey, what am I doing here? I asked what the little girl was doing, and then she replied to me that it was to talk to me. And I don't know, it didn't seem alarming at the time, because it kind of felt good to be there. I just asked what she wanted to talk about, and she said that she just wanted to tell me that I was safe. And she just kept digging and playing. She wasn't actually looking at me very much, but she'd look up every now and then and smile, just this beautiful golden angel smile. It was just beautiful. And there was just this sense of knowing exactly what she was referring to, which was in reference to the ghosts, spirits, and demons and stuff that I was now confronting. Because one area, because of that trauma, that I avoided actively was demons. And I think I would now call demons something than what you would consider them, because I don't think it's about good and evil. I think it's more like an animalistic thing, and they're just not physical. They're just not incarnated into a physical body at this time. But that they feed off energy. It's a whole thing. But I was a little bit nervous about doing this, because at first it started simple. We were just looking at stuff and trying to gather evidence and help people. And then things started getting more intense, and I was going to doing, investigations that were making me a little bit nervous until this dream happened. And I'm just sitting there with this little girl next to a river, and she's telling me it's all cool. And the first thing when she tells me that she wants to let me know I'm going to be safe, is that pops into my head is like the ghost hunting. I know how specific this dream sounds, but like I said, she was, and there's still something very peaceful and tranquil that comes to me when I even just think about that dream. And lucid dreams are pretty normal for me, so it just being super specific that doesn't sound super specific. The way that I'm seeing it in my mind is very super specific. I can't actually see things in my mind. I see bits and pieces, but I remember it like it happened yesterday. And it was profound. It felt like God telling me that I was on the right path and that I was doing whatever it was that I was supposed to be doing in that moment, and that I was protected. Higher power letting me know that I would be safe and that I was on the right path. And side note on that investigation, there were actually a couple of what I believe were attacks on my daughter in the days just prior to that, because I was getting ready to go and do this, because I knew that I was going to be doing this a couple of weeks before I was going to, and I'd actually worked on getting people together to assist me with that one because I was not ready to do it alone. But I had become almost like a project manager in my paranormal team. Like, people would tell me what's wrong and I would find the right people to help them. And so I had the right people. I was working around multiple schedules and I knew it was coming up, so it drug out longer than I would have liked it to. And about 3 or 4 days prior, she woke up one night with burn marks, what looked like burn marks on her chest. And then the following night to a large scratch with actual puncture marks on her arm. It was like as if somebody was standing on the outside of her, like on her left side, and they just grabbed onto the inside of her arm and raked it backwards. It was weird. And I don't know how she physically would have been able to do that to herself, nor do I think she would have. So, I was actually scared. And I felt like that dream coming after that happened was kind of profound for me. And I went in like a badass because I felt like I had all of the protection that I needed, and I have known since that moment that no one can fuck with me. Like, I'm not afraid of the dead anymore. Since that dream, I'm not afraid. And that's been a huge influence in my life. I still don't have those like super fucked up dreams, but I still have some very interesting ones. I could tell you all day about those, but I don't see myself getting dismembered anymore, so I do appreciate that. The investigative aspect was always something that, like I said, I would have clients agree to, but they usually reached out to me or responded, to posts that I had posted online, and that's kind of how we were getting the gigs, because I was offering to help people, or by word of mouth, they were reaching out to me. And I kept doing this on the side with my specialist that would come in and help with certain aspects. Like, I had Wiccan priestess, a medium. Unfortunately, some people moved away or people got flaky. It's really what it comes down to. And there was one investigation in particular that really fucked with the team, because I had one of my girls come out and she just didn't know what to do. She kind of tried to assure the guy, but it was one of my best friend's kids, and he was obviously dealing with some demons of his own, but I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't good at this kind of stuff. I was good at getting the right people to help you, and I wasn't afraid at all, but she seemed a little shaken, and I actually haven't heard from her since right after that. So I had this big long dream about that kid a year later. He ended up going missing, and we've never seen him again. That was 5 or 6 years ago. And it was almost like the kid was telling me that he had passed. I think he was, and he had a message for his mom. But I think that kid had demons in more ways than one. Sometimes you just have to keep moving on. even if something like breaks you. It didn't break me because I knew I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, but I do think it broke one of the members of my team. That and some other attachments that would also be a little bit annoying, and that was the one that had scratched my daughter, because even once we were able to get that one removed from that person, it still like tried to mess with people. I'll say that. So you might have more questions, and I'm happy to go over some more of that stuff later, but moving on, that brings me back to my job at the dealership, where I would go on to work a lot of positions. Like, I ended up launching that department, and I would be project manager, digital marketing assistant. I did accountability, loyalty manager. I could go on and on. It's kind of one of those things where I would take on many hats. Once I had been a manager for over a year, I wasn't really able to do anything else but that, ever. And all I could think about or do was work and home and family. Like, I was maxed out. COVID and everything going on with politics during that time really fucked with me too, showing me like how selfish and ignorant a lot of people really were. While I was like over here taking on more and more and more at work. And what I was seeing from my perspective was this inability to compromise and, flagrant ignorance just across the board. I was seeing like this rapid decline in respect, diplomacy, accountability. It just seemed like everyone had someone to blame and had no sense of compassion or decency in trying to find middle ground over a number of hot button issues. And it seemed like there was always a new one. There was always a new phrasing about like reframing, and I knew a lot of these, but I didn't see them in being used by everybody. Gaslighting. Oh my God. Gaslighting was one of the worst ones. Everybody was being gaslit. It was driving me crazy. But there were a number of customers and employees who had like no regard for others, and they would get a lot of people sick, myself included. A few weeks prior to that, a previous client had reached out to me for help with an attachment. That was one of the ones I had removed with the help of one of the members of my team. But it was still around him, just no longer attached to him, affecting him in a very negative way. And now I'm a few years into the management position. So in total, I had been at my job for almost 6 years. I'd recently lost my grandfather, my father-in-law within the same month. And on my side of the family, there was like all this drama because I had accused family members of not caring for my grandfather, which created a lot of drama. To be honest, I'm okay with that because, there were some people that were like racists and hardcore Trumpers, and they called me a retard over some really dumb stuff that we disagreed about. People would use that as an opportunity whenever they could because of the way I had looked when I was younger. So while there was no like love lost there, it had created a lot of issues within my family and my personal life. And at the same time, my husband's family was mourning their loss, and he was just trying his best to like cope with everything. So when I got COVID, I was actually really grateful for the time off. Not for getting sick, because that sucked, but it did give me an opportunity to invest some time in helping the man with the attachment. And with everything going on, I had also decided to like learn how to meditate due to all the benefits that I had learned about a long time ago. I just had like a million excuses, like being too ADD and other dumb shit. So my plan was to like do research on how to handle these nasty entities myself, because I'm like, okay, it's time to do this. Like, I can't rely on people anymore because I was already like bending over backwards and sideways to accommodate everybody's schedule as it was in the first place. But then people were flaking on me or had opted out, and I'm like, okay, it's time for me to just do this. It's like as if the universe had just guided me in a very specific way to that point in time. I had just stumbled upon Reiki, and it came very natural to me. And I stumbled upon it because of the meditation stuff. Because as I would meditate, I was doing like these motions with my hands that would like direct the flow of energy, and nobody told me to do that. I just started doing it. So I reached out to a family member that I knew did Reiki, and she was like, "Oh yeah, you need to do Reiki." She'd always wanted me to, but I didn't actually know what any of that meant or how you do it. But I mean, now it makes sense. I kind of feel stupid looking back that I didn't put all of those things together. But the way that I did it was very specific, and I still do it that way. But I did everything I do a lot of research on. And I take a lot of notes. And so, of course, I went and did Reiki. I became a Reiki master eventually. In my research, I learned about Kundalini and Ayurveda, which really called out to me. I was honestly hoping to be able to see spirits and entities like I used to before asking not to anymore. Even though, I was still a little scared at the time of what I might see. But I knew that I was protected, so I didn't care. It's kind of that shock factor now. Like, I'm still a little nervous about what I might see, but I'm not scared anymore, but I still can't see shit. It's great. I was out of work, though, for almost 2 weeks with COVID, because in Washington State, you had to be out of work for a minimum of 14 days at the time. So after that, it was funny because I was went out for COVID, and I was hardcore sick for about a week, but I'd already had my vaccinations by then, so wasn't as bad as I think it would have been otherwise. But I was profoundly changed. And that's when I had decided to become a Reiki master, to study all these different aspects of spirituality, because I binge watched a whole bunch of stuff. And I highly recommend the Gaia channel, by the way. If you can get the Gaia app, that's great. But that was what started those 2 weeks. My husband was at work all day, every day, pretty much. And I binge watched Gaia and Googled. I had my laptop with Google on my chase with me while I was watching Gaia. And I was texting people. I was like a sponge. I did quickly overcome my fear of what I would see, reminding myself that this, that's what the little girl had talked about. My goal was not for me to go in and do these special ceremonies. It was for other people, and I think that that's what I was meant to do, or at least take what I was learning and empower other people with that information. So that's how I had really done everything in my life up to that point, up to the point where I was having other people come in and do it. It's almost like having them come in and do it showed me that it can be done, that it was successful. But I still didn't imagine myself being the one to do that. I did it a little bit, but I didn't continue to do it because my thought was, well, why don't I just teach other people how to do that? I'm still going by notes, so forgive me because I'm reading ahead a little bit. Being honest to a fault, observing how ignorant people can be and constantly being bombarded by people who wanted attention and help problem-solving simple situations. I no longer felt like that little kid who was bullied by other kids and family members. I kind of proved everything that I feel like I needed to prove to myself. And eventually I would decide that I just wanted to move on. I didn't want to be at work in the corporate world, dealing with people not wanting to do their jobs. That's why I wore so many hats, is because it kind of got to a point where I wrote the book on it, and then arrogant new managers would come in and want to change the way that we had done things. They wanted to get rid of the formula that worked just so that they could get extra shine. It was ridiculous. But there was never a doubt in my mind about the paranormal phenomenon that I had seen. And through my spiritual journey, through a lot of shadow work and meditation, I came to a realization that my journey was never about helping to prove existence of anything, but to help others in understanding and dealing with it, through empowering themselves with the understanding that there is more to life than me or you or our perspectives. The world will keep on spinning, regardless of someone else's thoughts, actions, or opinions. So bringing this all full circle, I did get through it all okay. And that's kind of what all of this stuff that led me to my spiritual journey was unique to me. And I would go on to have that guy with the attachment perform a ceremony on himself. And I walked him through it, and it was successful. And the guy is just such a great guy. The last time he brought blueberries to me, lots of blueberries for a couple of summers. And I was really glad when he was able to get rid of the thing that had been, feeding on him, because he looked like he was dying. The last time that he came to me, he'd looked better than he did the first time, but it weighs on you. And I just felt awful for him. And I'm glad, though, that I had known him, because he helped push me in that direction. Truth, empowerment, and effective communication are like my specialty. And that's what I have to offer the world. But my perspective and my experiences may conflict with yours, and that's okay. I'm not just here to teach you. I'm here partly to find my tribe and to help share my experiences with other people. I'm happy to help answer questions and to talk more about my spiritual journey, but that's not the only thing that I want to do. Understand that any one religion is not going to be a factor in this equation for me, beyond undoing the damage that it has done. So that's the only stipulation, is I'm not going to talk religion with you. I'm not. I don't care. I'm not going to do it. As far as I'm concerned, the lies passed down as truths do not compute to me. They don't add up. I have been down a long and weird road that has taught me to be open to the unexpected, and I have come out the other side a believer in shit that I foolishly laughed off at others about in my younger days, because that's what my snobbish upbringing conditioned me to do. And I do want to eventually talk to you more about what my spiritual journey looked like. But I'll tell you, conspiracy theorists have been proving shit, like realities that we never conceived of or understood, have existed for decades. Not that the realities existed for decades, but for decades they've been proving this shit. And we can only go so long ignoring it. So what I do want to do is talk about what is happening. I don't want to talk about what the possibilities are. I want to talk about what I know is happening all around us, and how it's changing who we are as a society and a world. What if we are here to experience lessons and to help others to do the same? What if karma is real and that we all have trauma that we have to come together to resolve in this lifetime, so that we can finally reach the point where we can transcend our past once and for all? What if we are close to world peace and have been preparing for that for decades? Are there forces at play that would be negatively impacted were that to happen? And if so, who are they? And how do we break free from that reality in order to move forward toward a better one? Are we living in a reality that we think we understand, but is a creation of a shared collective consciousness? Or is it our own and they just overlap at times? Can we achieve world peace on Earth in our time? And what is the difference between ghosts, spirits, demons, elementals, and aliens? Why are the numbers of encounters increasing so rapidly? And what can we do to better understand them? And why in the hell can I not see beings I know exist after seeing them before now? And I feel quite ready to engage with them in a direct interface. If anyone has answers on that, I would love to hear insight. Because I have actually asked to be able to see them again. And I feel like, I should be able to, but here we are. As you can see, I still have a lot of questions myself. But I'm in the right direction, and I want to have these conversations. I want to cut through the bullshit and finally have grown-up conversations with people who are looking to do the same. I intentionally did not do much of an introduction because I'm hoping to find others who are better at this, who are also willing to help me. And I just wanted to jump right in It really did. I've never been the type that wants to have a big, huge lead up. I just want to get to the point. I know I'm like wordy, but I am also very directed, if you probably noticed. But I would love to hear your thoughts, answer your questions, and even feature, people that specialize in any of the many areas that we've covered, both here and on my website, flavorandspirit.com. My website will one day be a place where you can find information on any of this, as well as plant-based recipes, an online artisan store, and consultation services by wellness coaches, Ayurvedic practitioners, yogis, sound healers, and much more. I'm working on it. That's not all on there right now. I have every intention of being able to work from home in the very near future, because vision, I should not be driving. But I'm also, like I said, a writer, and me and my husband are actually working on this series of books that we're like a quarter of the way through. We're thinking it's going to be about a 9-book series, and it's filled with a lot of this kind of stuff. I have been able to get my associate's degree in psychology and was about halfway through my bachelor's when I ran out of funding. So that is something that I fully intend to finish once I can afford to invest the time and money. But as you may have guessed, I left that high-paying and time-consuming job a year ago, and now here we are. So if you want to help me out with making my dreams come true faster, feel free to send donations to Destiny McLaren on Cash App. I'll have a little link. But last but not least, I want to thank everyone who was able to make it to the end of this episode. I hope you come back again. Keep your eye out for more. Next up, we're going to dive right into those questions about aliens, UAPs, and everything paranormal, theories on connections to densities, dimensions, and what our future will look like. Share any thoughts or questions that you may have about what was discussed today, or that you want to hear about in an upcoming episode. You can always just email me directly at destinydawn1978@gmail.com. Thank you all so much for joining me. See you next time.